what I mentioned in the previous video follows a concept very similar to this one. You can take a lot and make very little out of it. You can take a little bit and make a lot. Sometimes we have a lot available to us in the way of resources, and we squander them, either because we're not very good at managing them, or because we take them for granted, or probably both. You're probably not good at managing plentiful resources if you take them for granted, because of that very fact. Because you take them for granted and you don't appreciate them, so you don't learn. You don't sort of let me find the right way to word this properly. You don't learn to multiply them, I guess is the best way to put it. Because that's what happens when you take a little bit and you don't have a choice and you make a lot out of it. Or you take subpar materials that are not that are not plentiful, and you make a quality product, or as much of a quality product as you can. You maximize the output, right? When that happens, it's probably because you've had to learn, how to live that way. You've had to learn how to, maybe you don't have a lot of ingredients available growing up. And I'm not including myself here, although we've all had periods of this, I suppose. Some people more than others. Maybe you had, few ingredients and you had to make them work, right? And then, you've got people who have, sorry, we got to word this again properly. You have people who have a large supply of things, or people who grow up in abundance, and they learn to not appreciate things in the same way, and so they don't learn to work them in the same way and get something necessarily as good out of them. They perhaps have so much of something that they can just kind of take it as it is, and when they have to produce, they have the ability to make more mistakes, you might say. There's so much of something there, or so much in general, that that one doesn't have to be quite as careful or quite as meticulous with the way things are used. Anyway, I was saying, there's a concept of taking a little bit, making a lot. Taking a lot and turning it into a little bit, so to speak, in your mind. You don't see it. You have a lot in front of you, but you just don't see it as a lot, right? Because the reference you have, it's just what you're used to. So your frame of reference is kind of doesn't see it as much, and so you psychologically you see it as little, right? And it's the same concept, as I said, as what I mentioned previously in the last video, which involves taking something of high quality and not knowing how to use it, right? Taking a violin, for example, or some kind of instrument that is that is of high quality or expensive or whatever, and that is supposed to make good music, but you just don't know what to do with it, right? And on the other hand, you've got someone who does know what to do with that instrument and doesn't need something quite as nice, and might even be able to be given something, well, let's say shitty, something of something that is not simply of high quality, but is actually of low quality, and can do something with it, can actually do, not just make it work, but can do a lot, right? Can take an old, low quality instrument, one might consider it, and make some really good music. You know, a lot of it has to do with with state of mind, with habits. You know, if you've had to learn to make do with little, you know how to do that. If you never had to learn because you had a lot, then, well, then you don't learn, right?